Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm Brandon Strong, your friendly commentator. We're going to talk about the greater drug war issue today. As we look at this, Russ over at Radical Russ Belleville put this out, and it's based on Tom Angel's findings that the U.S. government tried to hide from him the numbers of marijuana arrests. And he dug around and figured it out. And then Russ made this handy-dandy chart here that tells you just the marijuana arrests since the drug war started here. Pretty sure, like, leading up to Nixon, there was, about 38, 40, I don't know, 30. There was a couple decades of drug war on marijuana and whatnot before that, but this is where that really took off. Wow, look at under Clinton. All those private prisons that they built, they really paid off. Remember when Bush didn't get reelected? I don't think it would have. This thing right here wouldn't have changed a bit. As a matter of fact, it might have jumped up a little higher right here. But if Bush would have got reelected for 4 more years, this would be the exact same look, because they were already going to build the private prisons. They were already building the prisons. It was his rhetoric that spurred a new growth of the prison industry. He literally said, if you don't think we have room for minor drug offenders or marijuana, he did this statement in several different speeches and kind of interjected different nonviolent drugs into it. And he basically said, if you don't think we got room for the people that just do drugs, we'll make more room. We'll build prisons and make room. So there's what marijuana arrests look like. 25.8 million and over $1 trillion spent on this shit. What's it done? Has this stopped marijuana? Has this made it so marijuana was harder to find? Has this made it so marijuana wasn't as potent? This hasn't done anything that they tried to claim that this fucking drug war was going to do. All it's done is ruin 25.8 million people's lives. And all the police that arrested these people, they probably have a shitty life too, or they're corrupt as hell. So there's what that is. The drug war is a huge failure. We all know this. The United Nations said it. Back in 2011, why are we still doing this exercise and fucking insanity when you do the same thing over and over and hope for the same or hope for different results? It's insanity, guys. And I guess we're stuck because our government moves so slow to bend to the will of the people. It's almost like we need a real bloody revolution to fucking change this shit. Everybody in the government, whether it's whatever party they're affiliated with, they're all, as soon as they get in there, if they weren't corrupt before, they get in there and they get corrupt. There's too much money in there. Most people just join, try to become a government person because they want to get that corrupt money. No other reason. So Greenwald and David Miranda, a couple of my favorite authors, just put this out. And what this is it focuses on, Brazil, because right now Brazil is seeing the kind of drug violence that you are used to hearing about coming out of Mexico. I'm just going to read this maybe straight through. I might have a comment here and there. It's a pretty meaty article, but I don't really think I have a whole lot to add here. Glenn pretty much knocks this shit out of the park. And there's a lot to this, so I'm just going to go right into it. Might stop for an occasional drink of coffee, but anyway, or a hit of my joint, because I just woke up. So on July 1st, 2001, Portugal enacted a law to decriminalize all drugs. Under that law, nobody who is found possessing or using narcotics is arrested in Portugal, nor are they turned into a criminal. Indeed, neither drug user nor drug use or possession are considered crimes at all. And also, I might stumble a little bit because, like I said, I just woke up. I've already read this once, so nothing's going to take me by surprise. All right, instead, those found doing it are sent to speak with a panel of drug counselors and therapists, where they are offered treatment options. 7 years after the law was enacted in 2008, we traveled to Lisbon to study the effects of the law for one of the first comprehensive reports on this policy, and published the findings in a report for the Cato Institute. The results were clear and stunning. This radical change in drug laws was a fundamental and undeniable success. While Portugal throughout the 90s was, like most Western countries, drowning in drug overdoses along with drug-related violence and diseases, the country rose to the top of the charts in virtually all categories after it stopped prosecuting drug users and treating them like criminals. This stood in stark contrast to the countries that continued to follow a harsh criminalization approach. The more they arrested addicts and waged a war on drugs, the more the drug problem worsened. With all the money that had been wasted in Portugal to prosecute and imprison drug users now freed up for treatment programs, and with the government viewed with trust rather than fear, previously hopeless addicts transformed into success stories of stability and health, and the government's anti-drug messages were heeded. The predicted rise in drug usage rates never happened. In some key demographic areas, usage actually declined. And the 2009 study concluded, the data shows that, judged by virtually every metric, the Portuguese decriminalization framework has been a resounding success. Over the weekend, the New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof, writing from Lisbon, revisited this data. Oh no. Somehow my internet just got zapped. But anyway, let's see. Yeah, I was gonna do this story, and I kind of slacked on it. Didn't get it on time, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll just do this one because this came out today. And it's really wordy, but yeah, he gets right on into the streets of Portugal and talks to addicts, talks to these counselors, and talks to everybody, and basically, you know, his conclusion kind of is, you know, it wasn't the best thing. You can't, you know, it's not going to work for every problem that drugs presents to society. But compared to the prohibition tact, yeah, way better outcomes on all the numbers. We'll see that later. So, yeah, now there's more evidence than there was back in 2009 that this is a success. His conclusions were even more stark than the Cato report of 8 years ago, namely, Portugal has definitely won the argument about how ineffective, irrational, and counterproductive is drug prohibition. The basis for this conclusion, Portugal's clear success with decriminalization compared to the tragic failures of countries such as the U.S. and Brazil, which continue to treat addiction as a criminal and moral problem rather than a health problem. Kristof writes, after more than 15 years, it's clear which approach worked better. The United States drug policy failed spectacularly, with about as many Americans dying last year of overdoses, around 64,000, as were killed in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq wars combined. Man, I don't know why that don't wake people up. Like, this is all in 1 year. All the people that died from drug overdoses, that's more than the last 3 major wars that we've been in. In contrast, Portugal may be winning the war on drugs, but by ending it. Today, the health ministry estimates that only about 25,000 Portuguese use heroin, down from 100,000 when the policy began. The number of Portuguese dying from overdoses plunged more than 85% before rising a bit in the aftermath of the European economic crisis of recent years. Even so, Portugal's drug mortality rate is the lowest in Western Europe, 1/10 the rate of Britain or Denmark, 1/10, and about 1/5 the latest numbers for the U.S. Kristof succinctly identified one key reason for the success. It's incomparably cheaper to treat people than to jail them, but there are other vital reasons, including the key fact that when it comes to efforts to persuade addicts to obtain counseling, quote, decriminalization makes all this easier because people no longer fear arrest. And I would also go one step farther and say that once somebody is doing, you know, illicit drugs like heroin or meth or whatever, once you go down that road, you're choosing a path in places like America where prohibition is so hard line that you made a decision to go into the counterculture. And none of the stuff is available to you that is available to normal citizens. So it pushes you into this kind of a world where you're walled in, where you can't get a job, you can't get, even in some cases, public assistance, and, like there's really very few options for drug addicts in that prohibition situation. Churning yourself in, dying of an overdose, or committing crimes to continue your habit or your addiction. That's basically your choices. Perhaps the most compelling evidence highlighting Portugal's success is not the empirical data, but the political reality. Whereas the laws was quite controversial when first enacted 16 years ago, there are now no significant political factions agitating for its repeal and for a return to drug prohibition. That's because all the people that run the corruption, that keep the prohibition in place, those people fade back and they're focusing it on something else. They feel like they lost that battle, so they're not going to try to gain old ground or whatever. But I'm sure there's some in the background still pushing for prohibition, but just not. They just don't have anybody with them, and there's no traction to that movement. And it's quite easy to see why. All you got to do is point to a country like America. The evidence is of vital importance to the citizens of any country that continues to treat drug users and addicts as criminals. It is simply unconscionable to break up families, force children to remain apart from imprisoned parents, and turn drug addicts into unemployable felons, particularly if the data demonstrates that those policies achieve the opposite results as their claimed intent. But moral questions aside, the drug-related violence that is now sweeping Brazil, particularly the horrific war that is engulfing the Rio de Janeiro favela of Rocinha, just a few years after it was declared pacified, makes these questions of particularly urgency for Brazilians and the citizens of any count. Brazil has witnessed repeated outbreaks of horrific violence in the favelas of its largest cities, many of which have long been ruled not by the government but by well-armed drug gangs. But this past week's war, and that's what it is in Rocinha, located in the middle of Rio de Janeiro's fashionable Zona Sul, has been particularly shocking. So this is like someone's going to Madison Avenue and taking over the streets, trying to take over the drug trade in the streets. Competing drug gangs have invaded the favela and are now in open warfare for control of the drug trade, in the process forcing schools to close, residents to cower in their homes, and stores to remain shuttered. As Misha Glenny reported on Monday in The Intercept, quote, the immediate cause of violence is an ongoing struggle between and now within factions, but the violence portends the high likelihood of a wider war for the control of the drug trade. In the face of drug-related violence, there is a temptation to embrace the seemingly simplest solution, an even greater war on drugs, more drug dealers and addicts in prison, more police, more prohibition, or like Duterte, just more executions, more extrajudicial killings, more, just vigilante killings, more cops getting impunity to kill people randomly. Those who peddle this approach want people to believe a simple-minded string of reasoning. The cause of drug-related problems, such as violence from drug gangs, is drugs. Therefore, we must eliminate drugs. Therefore, the more problems we have from drugs, the more aggressively we rid society of drugs and those who sell and use them. But this mentality is based on an obvious, tragic fallacy, namely that the war on drugs and drug criminalization will eliminate drugs or at least reduce its availability. Decades of failure proves this will not happen. Rather, the opposite will occur. Like the U.S., Brazil has imprisoned hundreds of thousands of citizens for drug-related crimes, mostly poor and non-white, and the problem has only worsened. Any person with minimal rationality would be forced to admit this string of logic is false. Supporting a failed policy by hoping that one day it'll magically succeed is the definition of irrationality. In the case of drug laws, which spawn misery and suffering, it is not only irrational, but cruel. And insanity, right? Didn't I say that? Trying the same thing over and over again. A 2011 report from the Global Commission on Drug Policy. No internet. Sorry, guys. Featuring multiple world leaders, including former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and former Brazilian President Fernando Henrique Cardoso, examined all relevant evidence and put it simply, quote, the global war on drugs has failed, with devastating consequences for individuals and societies around the world. That's the United Nations Global Commission on Drug Policy. They're the same ones, by the way, who banned all drugs and substances back in the 1960s, like 1963. So, you know, if they were allowed to set policy based on saying that they think all drugs, including cannabis, should be made illegal and prohibited, why isn't their word authoritative and dictative when they say, okay, that shit we said back in 1963, that was wrong. We failed miserably at that, at the goals and aims of those goals. So, you know, why don't everybody just drop what they're doing and be like, okay, let's rewrite the policies to, you know, account for this new statement. The global drug war has failed with devastating consequences for individuals and societies around the world. That's 2011, guys. That's like fucking almost 7 years ago when that was put out. The primary fact in this conclusion is vitally important. The key cause of all drug-related pathologies, particularly gang violence of the type now suffocating Rocinha, is not the drugs themselves, but rather the policy of criminalizing drugs and the war waged in its name. Now here you see a common sight that you see in America and other places where prohibition is is deeply on set, is an impoverished area. Now, I don't know what's going on with that. The drugs don't cause the poverty, guys. Someone in the comment section somewhere was like, oh, hey, Brazil is shit. It's just a shithole, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, what you can't, that's not a thing, man. There's going to be poor people everywhere always because we live in a fucked up society. Humanity is just a greedy, you know, self-serving, monolithic beast of chewing people up and spitting them out, you know, mercilessly. So, of course, you're going to always have poverty, but why is there so much poverty everywhere? I think it's by design, man. Look at America. They basically gave away all the jobs that people could have that didn't go to college. So now you have to go to college. Not even the fucking people that go to college come out of college and they can't even get a job in their study. So they have to go get a job at Walmart. But anyway, back to this. You're going to have this impoverished situation everywhere, but not as bad. And with the drug war, it now becomes a war zone. This looks like, you know, when we invaded Iraq and we were doing like door-to-door sweeps looking for Al-Qaeda. Well, that's what this looks like. And when these guys, if these guys are the cops, they're fearing for their life. You know, you want to talk about cops having a dangerous job. Nothing makes cops' jobs more dangerous than prohibition. Nothing. There's nothing. You know, bad economies, yeah, they're always going to make it. The cops are going to have the hardest job of, you know, handling the crime wave that comes with shitty economies. But when it comes to, if there wasn't a bad economy, or even if there was and they can kind of handle what's going on, you throw prohibition in the mix and now you have gangs and shit. All right, we're almost done here. The nature of drugs, their small size, the ease of smuggling, the natural demand humans have for them, including every drug. Caffeine is a drug. That means they will never be eliminated or meaningfully reduced by force. Only changes in human behavior, which can happen only with sustained and professional treatment, can foster those improvements. The only effect of drug criminalization beyond the massive human and financial waste of imprisoning addicts is to empower and enrich drug gangs by ensuring that their profits from selling an illegal product remains irresistibly high. For that reason, the most devoted opponents of drug legalization or decriminalization are drug gangs themselves and governments that basically run a drug apparatus like the FDA, for example. So now you have like heroin. They don't want that to be legal. They want addicts to go to prison, but they also have stuff like OxyContin and, fentanyl. So if you can go through the legal channels and get that, it's okay. You can get that. You can have it. You got a doctor that approved it. You paid for it with the proper, through the proper channels or insurance. They criminalize the drugs that they can't control. Then they call it a controlled substance. It's controlled because you can't control it. It's like saying you can control marijuana. It's a fucking weed that grows and anybody can grow it. You can't control that shit. So what you do is you say, oh, that's a controlled substance. So if we catch you with it, we're going to put you in jail. And then you manufacture your own drugs. And, this is the whole story of the pharmaceutical industry, folks. That's how it got started, and that's how it perpetuates this drug war in America. They're the most powerful people to do it. Unfortunately, there's other lobbies that do it too. And the tobacco and alcohol, by the way, the other drug dealers, they're still pretty much in the game to keep marijuana prohibited. A couple of their interests are looking into how they can get involved by taking over the whole thing. But other than that, yeah, this is a pretty good rationalization. The most devoted opponents of drug legalization or decriminalization are the drug gangs themselves. And sometimes the drug gangs are your government, like in the case of America. Nothing would erase the power of drug gangs, such as the ones violently battling for control of Rocinha, more quickly or severely than the elimination of the drug prohibition. As adapt business people, drug traffickers know that very well. In 2016, journalist Johann Hari, author of one of the most influential books on drug addiction, wrote an article in the Huffington Post entitled, "The Only Thing Drug Gangs and Cartels Fear is Legalization." As he put it, when you criminalize a drug for which there is a large market, it don't disappear. And by the way, remember that chart? Yeah. The second most used substance that gets you a buzz is cannabis, right behind alcohol. So, yeah, they knew that the drugs wouldn't disappear. The trade is simply transferred from off-licenses pharmacists to doctors and armed criminal gangs. In order to protect their patch and their supply routes, these gangs tool up and kill everyone who gets in their way. You can see this any day on the streets of a poor part of London or Los Angeles, where teenage gangs stab or shoot each other for control of the 3,000% profit margin on offer. We have a perfect historical analogy that proves this point: alcohol prohibition in the U.S. in the 1920s. When alcohol was made illegal, it did not disappear. Control of its sale and distribution simply shifted from the corner grocery store to violent drug gangs of the type that Al Capone became famous for ruling. In other words, making alcohol illegal did not stop people from consuming it. What it did do, though, was empowering vicious gangs of organized crime for whom the massive profits of selling illegal alcohol made them willing to do anything or kill anyone to protect. What finally eliminated those violent prohibition gangs was not police or imprisonment of illegal dealers or alcoholics. Remember, they even threw Al Capone himself in prison for tax evasion, but still, they took him out of the loop. 10 more people stepped in where he was at. During Prohibition, when the gangs weren't bribing the police, they were killing them. What eliminated those gangs was not the re-legalization of alcohol, which started in Michigan, by the way. With a constitution adjustment is how they eventually did it nationwide. So by regulating the sale of alcohol, the end of Prohibition made the gangs irrelevant, and thus they disappeared. And even today, in deep Republican territory, where Jesus is the government, like down in Georgia, there's still these things called dry counties. And what do you have there? You have moonshine manufacturing. So it's almost like you can just sense that because there's a black market for something, automatically there's going to be people that try to fill the demand. Of course. This is like it's the formula that corrupt governments always know is a thing, like, oh, if we prohibit something, there's going to be an underground market for people to buy it, and there's going to be people we can target to arrest that are going to try to be the dealers. That's what the fucking whole thing is. It's a big game. It's a big circle jerk, and the people that lose are the little people on the ground. Meanwhile, the government is shipping in the fucking drugs. And even the big people that aren't the government that's shipping the drugs, if they get caught, it's not really a big deal. They don't, believe it or not, man. I mean, you got to be like a head chopping off like dude like El Chapo for people to be like, oh yeah, put that guy behind bars, put him under the prison. Don't ever let him out. Anybody else, as long as he didn't chop off 100,000 heads, you're a hero. Even El Chapo's a hero in some economies in Mexico where people really, their backs are against the wall. It's a violent drug war going on there. All right, back to the story. Violent drug gangs do not fear the war on drugs. To the contrary, as Hari notes, they crave it. It is the criminalization of drugs that makes their trade so profitable. Hari quotes longtime drug enforcement official in the U.S. as relating, quote, on one undercover tape-recorded conversation, a top cartel chief, Jorge Roman, expressed his gratitude for the drug war, calling it, quote, a sham put on the American taxpayer that was, quote, actually good for business. It's so good for business. Unfortunately for the Mexican population, that is why they have that drug war. They're not shipping those drugs to anywhere but here. I mean, if any of it gets out of America, it probably came here first. And then they have, I'm kind of exaggerating. They do ship a lot of drugs through Africa up into Europe too. But America is the number one customer for this drug trade in Mexico. It's so bad that, yeah, our demand is causing them to have all these little market wars where drug cartels are fighting for control of trade routes, control of fields that grow the drugs, control of people, actual people on the ground that are willing to do the smuggling or do the killing for enforcement or whatever. It's all very highly competitive, and the end result is just devastation and death. In 2015, Danielle Allen, a political theorist at Harvard University, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post entitled How the War on Drugs Creates Violence. In it, she explained that one key reason to decriminalize drugs flows from how the war on drugs drives violent crime, which in turn pushes up incarceration and generates other negative social outcomes, as she explained. Quote, you just can't move $100 billion worth of illegal product without a lot of assault and homicide. This should not be a hard point to see or make. Why in Rocinha, filled with guns and ruled by drug gangs that are capable of such violence? Why can an influential Brazilian politician linked to some of the most powerful figures in the country employ a pilot who was caught transporting millions of dollars in cocaine in a helicopter owned by the politician? The helicopter, by the way. Probably the drugs, too. With no consequences for everyone? The answer is clear, because laws which outlaw drugs ensure that the drug trade is extremely profitable, which in turn ensures that gangs of organized criminals will arm themselves, will kill, in order to control it. Situated in the middle of Zona Sul, with easy exits, Rocinha will inevitably be a drug haven for rich tourists, middle-class professionals, and impoverished addicts. The vast sums of profits created by the war on drugs ensure that police forces will not only be out-armed, but also corrupted, that their efforts will inevitably fail. It is now undeniably clear that it is the war on drugs itself which is what causes, not stops, drug-related violence. If you're horrified by the violence in Rocinha or places around the world like it, the last thing you should do is support more policies that fuel the violence, namely criminalization and the war on drugs. To do so is like protesting lung cancer by encouraging people to smoke. The data is now sufficient to state confidently those who support ongoing drug criminalizations are the ones abetting this drug violence and the related problems of addiction and overdose. It may be slightly paradoxical at first glance, but the data leaves no doubt. The only way to avoid Rocinha-style violence is through full drug decriminalization. We no longer need to speculate about this. Thanks to Portugal, the results are in, and they could not be clearer. So that was Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda. Awesome, excellent report. These days, brave reporting. Drug cartels aren't too keen on people reporting on their activities. As we just seen recently, there was the show on Netflix about the Cali cartel. There was one of the people that are involved in that project was in Mexico looking for scouting for a location to shoot, and they found his car full of bullets and he was dead in it. Like, that's, you know, this violence is not to be underestimated at all. You know, this is real shit going on in Brazil. It's melting down into just unbelievable gang warfare right on the streets. Like I said, right in the areas where you wouldn't expect to see it, you know, but those are the areas, like it was mentioned in the article, that, hey, you know, rich people are down here gallivanting around and they need their drugs. And you got drug addicts right around the corner in the slum areas. They're basically, there's like a dividing line, and boom, all the stuff on that side slums. And then you have just general, like, you know, people that are just out having a good time, you know, whatever that means. Apparently in Brazil, part of it is being able to do recreational drugs. So, you know, great analysis of this whole situation. We need to end the war on drugs, man. That's all there is to it. How do we do that? Maybe we should look to the UN for guidance. I mean, they're the ones that told us how to make them illegal in the first place with these schedule systems, and which sounds to me like the whole scheduling system, internationally speaking, was probably developed by the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry are multinational corporations that are always family owned. That I've, in my research, I've always noticed that they're family owned businesses, and they're located all over the world, mostly in Germany and America and New Jersey. And these companies they're predatory, man. They look at everything as competition. They're driving the drug war. Like I said, alcohol and tobacco lobbies are driving the drug war. Corrupt people in the government are driving the drug war. Look at Duterte. His son might be involved in the biggest meth dealing operation in the Philippines, and he's out there telling people you can shoot someone for being a weed smoker. All right, that's all I got on this. Like I said, if you're new to this channel, if you just stumbled on this video, this is the kind of stuff I do. And yeah, if you like it, hit the button and hit the subscribe button as well. And if you were subscribed to my channel, make sure you still are, because I'm still losing subscribers, man. This is crazy. It's like every time I upload a video, sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't, because I get so many people subscribing that it still overcomes the people that are getting dropped. But nonetheless, people are still getting dropped off. And, you know, sometimes the number goes below the number it was before, but usually it don't. But usually I'll see where it stops, or where it's going down and then it goes back up, because I kind of pay attention to that. I've been looking for it, and I'm trying to gauge exactly how many subscribers I've lost over the months. But that's all. See you next time.